Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Immediacy, Urgency, or Tranquility, What Moves Us to Write with Dzvinia Orlowsky and Carolyne Wright. I am Helen Hokinson. I'm a reference librarian at Johnson County Library and one of the coordinators for our writing programs. Check out our For Writers page for more information about our monthly writing contests, our November Writers Conference, and other resources and events. If you feel comfortable, please leave your cameras turned on so we can see your smiling faces, but maybe turn your microphone off when you are not speaking to cut down on background noise. Dzvinia Orlowsky is a Pushcart Prize poet, an award-winning translator, and a founding editor of Four-Way Books. She's published 6 poetry collections by Carnegie Mellon University Press, including A Handful of Bees, reprinted for the Carnegie Mellon University Classic Contemporary Series, A Convertible Night, Flurry of Stones, winner of a Sheila Motton Book Award, and Bad Harvest, a 2019 Massachusetts Book Award, must read in poetry. Her poem sequence, The Disenchanted Desna, was selected by former National Poet Laureate Robert Pinsky as a 2019 winner of the New England Poetry Club's Samuel Washington Allen Prize. Her co-translations with Ali Kinsella from the Ukrainian of Natalka Bilotsur-Kivitz poems, Eccentric Days of Hope and Sorrow, was published by Lost Horse Press in 2021 and was a finalist for the 2022 Griffin International Poetry Prize. Alta's National Translation Award in Poetry, the Derek Walcott Poetry Prize, and winner of the AAUS Translation Prize. She is writer in residence at the Solstice Low Residency MFA program in creative writing and a contribution poetry editor to AGNI and Solstice Literary Magazine. So welcome, Dzvinia. Carolyne Wright's latest books are Masquerade, a memoir in poetry from Lost Horse Press 2021, and This Dream the World, new and selected poems, also from Lost Horse in 2017. This Dream the World's title poem received a Pushcart Prize and appeared in The Best American Poetry in 2009. Wright is a Seattle native who has lived and taught all over the country and on fellowships in Chile, Brazil, Indiana, and Bangladesh. She has 16 earlier books and anthologies of poetry, essays, and translation from Bengali and Spanish, the latest of which is Map Traces, Blood Traces, Trazas de Mapa, Trazas de Sangre, from Mayapple Press in 2017, which is a bilingual sequence of poems by Seattle-based Chilean poet Eugenia Toledo, finalist for the 2018 Washington State Book Award in Poetry and for the 2018 Penn Los Angeles Award in Translation. She's a contributing editor for the Pushcart Prizes, and she's received NEA and 4 Culture grants and a Fulbright U.S. Scholar Award to Brazil, received in early 2020, which was, of course, delayed by COVID, but she did make it to Salvador Bahia in June and July in 2022, with another 2 months upcoming in 2023. And hopefully there's time for our program after that incredible list of accomplishments. It's hard to believe. So I'm very excited to be here with you, and I will turn it over to Dzvinia and Carolyne.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you, Johnson County Library and Lisa Allen and everybody for being here. We couldn't be happier to be here and to present this program. Carolyne and I are going to be talking about tranquility, urgency, and immediacy in poetry. And I just want to say, couldn't be happier than to do this with Carolyne, whose work, in my opinion, always embodies one of those 3, whether she's writing from the heart or writing in translation or through translation. So I think this is, we've had an exciting time planning and pre-conversing this. So we hope you'll feel the same. So anyway, briefly, what prompted this is particularly with the war in Ukraine, and I am Ukrainian American, and I've been immersed in translation since 2020. I've been thinking a lot about immediacy and urgency and how interchangeably we use those terms as writers, but there is a slight difference between those. And then also thinking about, tranquility. Do writers, for example, in Ukraine, write at any point from a moment of tranquility? Or is it urgent and immediate all the time? And how is that expressed through the American canon of writing? So we've selected key poems that we feel touch on those, and in our reading and brief discussion of them, we also wanted to just draw attention to the craft elements and how we feel aside from the subject matter, which usually suggests that this is an immediate or an urgent subject, how that is conveyed through the writing of the poem. That isn't just dependent on the title. So I'd like to welcome and invite Carolyne to start off with a poem that she chose.
Thank you so much, Dzvinia, and thank you again, Johnson County Library, for inviting us, and thank you for everybody who's here in the Zoom room. I'm guessing there's some people doing this on Facebook Live or something, but anyway, it's good to be here. It's interesting. This was all synchronicity. I found myself choosing poems that I go back to again and again, and that occur to me without, looking through a lot of books. Although I did look through a lot of books, but the first poem I'm going to read is by William Stafford, the best Northwest poet that the state of Kansas ever produced, as he liked to say. He was from Hutchinson, Kansas. So there's one level of synchronicity. And the other is that the poem of his that I chose is one that I remember reading in high school and being incredibly impacted by that poem. And then later on, I was privileged enough to be able to study with him. It's called At the Bomb Testing Site. Think about the fact that movie Oppenheimer is just about to be released also. So this is the situation. At the Bomb Testing Site by William Stafford. At noon in the desert, a panting lizard waited for history, its elbows tense, watching the curve of a particular road as if something might happen. It was looking at something farther off than people could see, an important scene acted in stone for little selves at the flute end of consequences. There was just a continent without much on it, under a sky that never cared less. Ready for a change, the elbows waited, the hands gripped hard on the desert. And so that was William Stafford's poem, which, I'm thinking, of course, it's before the first atomic bomb was set off in open air by Oppenheimer. And when those hands grip hard in the desert at the end, are those the hands at the end of those tense elbows of the lizard? Or are those the human hands of all of those scientists there at the testing site, not knowing what was going to happen? And I think the poet leaves it to us to decide, or is it both, right? Dzvinia, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in, and that's such a fantastic poem, and you read it beautifully, Carolyne, that what for me really, really drives the sense of immediacy and in particular, and urgency in the subject matter is the unmediated awareness.
Right.
It's so rich in details that you just know that nothing is interrupting, and even this, I like to think that it is the lizard, but the lizard is symbolic of people, is feeling this and just waiting in anticipation. So the level of the sky going down to the detail of the lizard, I think it's quite extraordinary. And one of my favorite lines too is at the flute end of consequences, because it's just bringing in that flute and And so you're picturing the spiral grooves, but yet it flute is such a calming thing. And that creates a lot of dramatic tension because surely there's nothing calming about this moment. Yeah, great example.
Thank you.
Okay. And again, I'm going to say, Carol and I we're going to have a Q&A at the end of this so that we do want to go through these poems. But if you have any questions about any of these poems, please hold on to them because I'd love to hear what those are. So I wanted very much to read a poem by a Ukrainian writer. And I chose Victoria Amelina because she was as you know, the 37-year-old poet, novelist, human rights activist, and she was cataloging war crimes, who died at this fairly recent bombing of a restaurant in eastern Ukraine, Kramatorsk. And this poem, unfortunately, I don't have in Ukrainian, but I did find, and I included the link and a reading in NPR, and it's translated from the Ukrainian by Yulian Blacker, and it's called About a Crow. And I just want to say up front, the pacing of this poem is slower, but it's not tranquility. So as you listen to it, is it resignation? Is it bravery, determination, resolve? See what you think, but it's certainly a sense of no escape. About a crow. In a barren springtime field stands a woman dressed in black, crying her sister's names. Like a bird in the empty sky, she'll cry them all out of herself. The one that flew away too soon, the one that had begged to die, the one that couldn't stop death, the one that has not stopped waiting, the one that has not stopped believing, the one that still grieves in silence. She'll cry them all into the ground, as though sowing the field with pain. And from pain and the names of women, her new sisters will grow from the earth. And again, we'll sing joyfully of life. But what about her, the crow? She will stay in this field forever. Because only this cry of hers holds all those swallows in the air. Do you hear how she calls each one by her name? Hard to read through that one without getting emotional. I chose it aside from the fact that it is immediate subject matter, but also because in the middle of the repetition, it's like an incantation. It almost feels like the speaker is put under a spell or a prayer. And even though the entire poem is this image of things emptying themselves, she fills herself with this presence and this belief that as long as she holds these names in the air, they won't be forgotten. So I think this is a good poem, actually, to work in with ideas of sisterhood. So hopefully that spurred some ideas for that. And Carolyne, would you like to comment?
Yes, thank you. And thinking back to the poem, the William Stafford poem, there are certain similarities in the setting, the very setting. We have a lizard on a rock in the desert, and we have a crow in a field that seems deserted because of, except for the woman dressed in black, or is she the crow? Right, she can be the crow. She can also be the woman, and there is a crow there also. So I was thinking of the crow as literal and also as the woman.
Yeah.
And of course, you would be able to, if you saw the original in Ukrainian, you could tell if the crow is entirely metaphorical or if it's also a literal bird on this field, which is a barren field. I think the way the woman is in this state of, she just seems to be in a state of real, I mean, the urgency is there. It's almost desperation. and the pain that she is feeling, and the sense of the absence of so many people who are gone, and it seems really premonitory for what is going to happen to the poet herself not long after she writes this poem, which is one of the great tragedies of war. With the way that you have been published in the Ukrainian contemporary poetry series, your translations, and you have another book forthcoming of translations. I keep wondering, will we hear any more? Will other of the poets translated be caught up and become casualties of this war?
It
You just never know.
It's very, very likely, and so that the urgency to
Right.
translate is there. Wonderful point though, Carolyne, and I just wanted to mention one more thing before we move on in terms of this poem with the imagery, and hopefully all of you have handouts so you can look at them and then just look at this a little bit closely, is that there are all these little like dramatic tensions with these contradictory terms like barren, springtime field. Normally you think of springtime as barren. That's almost a little bit of a James Wrightian, or even like a Rimbaud season, spring in hell type of thing. And crying her sister's name like a bird in the empty sky. The sky certainly is one of those areas that have been and are being violated with the no-fly zones and the fly zones and the mist and everything. So it's this moment that the bird can be free to fly, but the sky is empty. It's not a missile-free sky. It's gone beyond that. It is empty. It's devoid of anything. So again, I invite you to take a closer look at this poem, particularly through the lens of sisterhood.
Yeah. And I don't know how many of the people in the audience did get the handout. I know it was emailed as an attachment to many people. Is it possible to post it in the chat, post the file in the chat for anybody who may not have gotten the file because they didn't they registered late or something?
Yes,
that would be great. Yeah,
the
that
links
would
are
be
in the chat.
excellent. So I am going to read the next poem I'm going to read. Also has this sense of it's an indoor presence. The poem is called Incident, a very sort of bland, non-committal kind of title, but it's by Natasha Trethewey, who was, she's a biracial poet, but because of the way her race is sort of inscribed in this country, her father was white, her mother was Black. Her father, Eric Trethewey, was a white poet who taught at Hollins University for many years until he retired. And he passed away, I think, a few years ago, but I remember meeting him. But Natasha's mother was Black. And the two of them, Eric and Natasha's mother, met, and they had to go to, they met, I believe, in Kentucky, and they had to cross into Ohio to get married because it was still illegal for, interracial couples to marry. And who knows, but that we might be going back to that again, right? I don't know. But this poem is, I think, deliberately non-committal in the title and sort of non-committal in its tone, which is very, very calm, and I think deliberately free of the kind of terror that the family might have been feeling. It's also a pantoum, so you'll hear the repetition and the haunting quality created by the way that pantoums repeat pairs of lines. Incident by Natasha Trethewey. We tell the story every year, how we peered from the windows, shades drawn, though nothing really happened. The charred grass, now green again. We peered from the windows, shades drawn, at the cross, trussed like a Christmas tree. The charred grass, still green. Then we darkened our rooms lit the hurricane lamps. At the cross, trussed like a Christmas tree, a few men gathered, white as angels in their gowns. We darkened our rooms and lit hurricane lamps, the wicks trembling in their fonts of oil. It seemed the angels had gathered, white men in their gowns. When they were done, they left quietly. No one came. The wicks trembled all night in their fonts of oil. By morning, the flames had all dimmed. When they were done, the men left quietly. No one came. Nothing really happened. By morning, all the flames had dimmed. We tell the story every year. You might have the sense, I mean, in a way, it's a poem I think you have to read a couple of times. I read it a few times and then I realized it's a cross burning by the Ku Klux Klan in their white robes. And it's a Black family inside that house, turning out all their lights, leaving on just some little lamps that maybe could not be seen from the outside. They wanted to seem as if they weren't home, you know. And they're being terrorized. This is domestic terrorism in the era when the Klan dressed in white. Now they dress in camouflage and flak jackets and I don't know what all else. They have different names. They don't call themselves the KKK anymore. But I thought it was so interesting that she chose this form, this very haunting pantoum form. Because in a way, the fact that the family tells the story every year, and that's both the first and the last line, which is how a pantoum is structured, indicates that haunting, repetitive quality. It is a story that is stopped in time for them. They are haunted by it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So.
And thank you, Carolyne. And to add to that, the haunting, the obsession, is characteristic of the villanelle or the pantoum, where you have the repeated lines. But what strikes me with this one is that sometimes with a pantoum, the strength of the pantoum is that repeated line really hammers back in. So you feel this really vice grip, immediate urgent sense of this has to be repeated. But this whole poem doesn't have that. It's got the repetitions, but they're there, but I hear them in a subtle way. So you get this sense of something being hushed, a sense of something that can't just be screamed out loud. Hey, this is happening again and again. It's a behind the curtains kind of repetition to tell the story. So tonally, it very much uses that form in a way that is not always used. And again, focusing in on just imagery, I love what the grass does is like the charred grass now green again. It's like peaceful. We're back on good terms here with life. But then the charred grass still green. That I hear this like despite. It's almost like, where the grass is gaslighting us, saying, we're still green, so this can't be this serious, So there are all these kind of like dramatic shifts going on. And I love the fact that everything is dimming, but the story, which is not on floodlight bright, but just nonetheless on its own terms, never dims. So I think that that's a really beautiful way that the poem kind of ties in all its imagery.
And the fear that the family must feel as they're being terrorized is also very, very repressed in the poem, which I think in a way embodies the way that African Americans had to live in the South for generations during slavery, and then that, de facto almost slavery of Jim Crow for another 100 years. And the way that you had to be very careful about everything you said, your tone of voice, and even the tone of this poem, I think reflects that,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The next poem I'd like to read involves immediacy and urgency in the subject matter implied in the title, but also wanted to bring up the sound links that are going on here.
Mhm.
It is called Late Summer After a Panic Attack by Ada Limon. I can't undress from the pressure of leaves, the lobed edges leaning toward the window like an unwanted male gaze on the backside. They wish to bless and hush. What if I want to go devil instead? Bow down to the madness that makes me. Drone of the neighbors mowing, a red mailbox flag erected, a dog barked from 3 houses over, and this is what a day is. Beetle on the wainscoting, dead branch breaking but not breaking, stones from the sea next to stones from the river, unanswered messages like ghosts in the throat. A siren whining high toward town, repeating that the emergency is not here, repeating that this loud silence is only where you live. All right, so I'll admit I was drawn to it because it's talking about a panic attack, and I thought, oh, this is certainly going to work. But I love the poem because of all the kind of like double meanings that are going on here. The ending, this is the loud, that this loud silence is only where you live. That can be taken as physically the address or where you live in your head. But I think what's really interesting is like what happens sound-wise for emphasis. That parenthetical, they wish to bless and hush. I'm sorry, maybe it's me, but that line just gave me the creeps. It just sounded so predatory, where you're blessing and you're hushing while you bring the devil's work forward. And then the speaker's own questioning. And when she brings up, maybe I want to go with the devil instead, it's like the language, the sound links pick up. You've got drone mowing, red, erect, over, etc. The branch, almost dead branch breaking, but not breaking. So the pacing and the rhythm picks up. And that's something else to consider and take a look at, that a poem can start out in tranquility, but then flip a switch, and then the language reinforces that the speaker is getting agitated or maybe understanding that this is not as peaceful a situation as I thought. And I'd love, let me see, a couple other things I wanted to bring up. Yes, is that the whole idea of silence and the way that works with a panic attack, that silence almost is the door that opens to all those things that you're distracted by during the day when you're busy. And so suddenly when you have the silence that's supposed to be equated with peace, that's when everything starts rolling in full guns and barrels, etc. And also one thing midway through, one of my favorite spots is that caesura, which is a break in the middle of a line. And this is what a day is. Those 7 monosyllabic words, it's so emphatic. And this is what a day is, period. Then she continues on with the imagery. That's something that, James Wright used in his famous poem, A Blessing. When you're working on your own poems, just think and this is what a day is, if that ended the line, it's so assumed that it's going to end there, that it weakens the poem. But mid-sentence, it's like, okay, I'm making this point, but I'm surviving this point and I'm moving on. So that was just like one craft element in terms of line break that I wanted to point out that I think Ada uses very efficiently in this poem.
Yeah, I think that's great. She also has 2 lines that, the sentence ends and then there's a single word that is the beginning of a sentence that continues on the next line, the enjambment. And those are, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, lines 5 and 6, bow down to the madness. And then the next line, drone of the neighbors mowing. And then again, you also get that bow down, that ow sound. And then the drone of the mowing, the oh sound. But I always think it's interesting. One thing that we say a lot with, especially with free verse, where you're not required to end the line with a certain word because of a repetition or because of a rhyme. Those sorts of line breaks, often they put a lot of emphasis on the words that come at the end of lines and also the words that come at the beginning of lines. So, for example, I love the way bow down. Both the bow at the end of the word, at the end of the line, excuse me, and down at the beginning of the next line take a lot of weight. You know, it's like a spondy, but with a line break in between, you know. And another thing I was thinking, another thing that poets do is echo or make reference to, allude to, and that's spelled A-L-L-U-D-E, not elude, that's to evade, that's something else. But there, I see a lot of allusions here, whether they are intended or not. And both of the allusions I noticed were to James Wright, whom we're going to get back to pretty soon. He's no relation to me, by the way, but the reference in the line, the dead branch breaking but not breaking, of course, one of James Wright's most pivotal books was called The Branch Will Not Break. And the situation in that poem is he's been on a bender and he's in a hospital to dry out. And he looks out his window and he's in a sort of a really bleak mood. And he sees this blue jay jumping up and down on a branch. And it's like the poem ends, he knows as well as I do that the branch will not break. So there's a certain confidence, a certain trust in what life brings in that poem. But this poem takes that same image of a branch and does something different with it. And then, of course, it continues. There's that stones from the river, from the stones from the sea next to stones from the river. And of course, what did I think of that much later? James Wright title, Shall We Gather at the River? Which, of course, is like a reference to, alludes to a lot of those country baptisms that used to go on, you know, where people would go down to the river and be baptized right in the stream, you know. Yeah, there's a good scene of that in the film, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? You know, so I was thinking of that imagery as I was reading this, you know. So yeah, and so this poem seems to me to be a bit equivocal. It isn't a poem that comes to any kind of positive, you know, or affirmative resolution at the end. But the loud silence is only where you live. And it's like that internal buzz in her head. It's within her, it's where she lives. It may not exist beyond her, which I think conveys a sense of perhaps somewhat heavily compromised relief that this loud silence doesn't exist beyond herself. But who knows, you know, she's had the panic attack and it's over, you know, so.
Carolyne, would you like to read Disappeared? That'd be great.
I just muted myself. And this is a wonderful synchronicity because Eugenia Toledo is here with us in the audience. And if we have time, I would like Eugenia to read the original, but let's wait till the Q&A because I'd had the original poem Desaparecido on the page, but we decided we would just do the English, at least in this part. Okay. So this poem is called Disappeared, which of course is a word that has gained a lot of traction or a great deal of notoriety in the last couple of decades because, you know, disappeared has become a noun, the disappeared. The people who have been disappeared. And it has also become this sort of, transitive verb, or is it intransitive? Anyway, people who are disappeared. They don't disappear on their own. They are disappeared by the authorities, by gangs of kidnappers or death squads working for the government. So this is the poem in English, and it's dedicated to Maurice Hébert, who was a priest And a colleague of Eugenia's way back in the early 70s, at the time of the military coup in Chile, which was the first 9/11, September 11th, 1973. And that coup, of course, was supported, financed, and I think to some degree directed by agents of the US government. Those, I better not get too political here, but the guys in charge at that point, Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon, and Kissinger is still alive, I can't believe it. Anyway, disappeared by Eugenia Toledo, and it's dedicated to Maurice Hebert. You turned the corner and disappeared. They reported you missing before my very eyes. 2 agents of the Secret Service roughed you up and dragged you from your office at the university. More than 40 years have passed, and what you said has remained hanging in the air with some flavor of the divine. You murmured in English, "It is finished." The spokesmen of law and order were threatening the town, and the horsemen of persecution rode the gray days. The local newspapers never wrote a word, while an unknown cold turned the truth to stone, where you left me trembling in the shadows. So, I mean, this really captures what Eugenia, I mean, when we talked about translating this poem, Eugenia said that's exactly what happened. I mean, you saw the incident, you saw it happen, and then her colleague and friend was just whisked away, and then no word from him for years. And then it turned out that he was, there was communication later, but he whispered in English, he murmured in English, "It is finished." And that is, who is that speaking? That's Jesus himself on the cross, his last words before he dies on the cross, right? He said, "It is finished," in Aramaic or whatever language he was speaking at the time. And I love the way in English it works out. The phrase law and order, of course, has been one of those watchwords of one of the 2 major political parties in this country, right? And yet they are the ones who are threatening the lawful order in this poem. And then we've got the horsemen of persecution riding the gray days. And again, I'm thinking the horsemen of the apocalypse, of course, in the book of Revelations at the end of the Bible. And so this sense of doom and this sense of end times, and it was indeed end times for the democratically elected government of Salvador Allende, And of course, the newspapers could not. They were censored. They could not mention such an incident. And the poet, the speaker here is just trembling. And this is what Eugenia was witnessing. And ultimately, when she was, removed from her job at the university, she came to this country and has lived here ever since, except for a couple of, periods of time, like during COVID, when she was back in Chile with her husband, but she's back in the state of Washington now. Hola, Eugenia.
Hola, Carolina. Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here.
Yeah.
I had the chance to appear, and that's great.
Yeah, you weren't sure. You had an appointment. Yeah.
Yes, I had an appointment with the doctor, but there's a lot of connections related to the Bible here because he was a priest that time. And he was about to leave the priesthood, by the way. But at that time when he was, he was tortured. I have learned through the years. Maurice died last year in Canada, and he had Alzheimer. So it was double. It was very sad because he will not for years don't remember what happened to him. And now I have been living in Chile most of the time since 2011. And so I learned a lot of more stuff, more things. And also I said here in this poem, more than 40 years have passed
Right.
Más de 40 años han pasado. But the reality is that this year it will be 50 years.
Yes, exactly.
50 years since Salvador Allende was
Number
killed.
11. Yeah.
So now we have, half of a century, right? And some of us, most of us, we are disappearing also because we are becoming old. And it was incredible that he said that to me when he left. He turned around, stopped, he said, "It is finished." Okay, something is finished.
Yeah.
And almost he lost his life. He was saved or somebody, for a friend, with the
he must have thought, he probably thought he was going to be killed.
Yes.
And he probably said it in English because he probably thought that the people arresting him would not understand. But he knew he could trust that you would. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And you were his witness.
Right. And I was a witness. And I ended up paralyzed, seeing something like that. I never expected that, such a thing. And that's the reason why I use trembling at the end, because temblor is terrible. Temblor is terrible when your body is trembling, when you are afraid, when you are sick, when somebody's, is gonna die. And it's absolutely the worst things that can happen to you. And he disappeared. I didn't know much about him until I didn't intervene. He had powerful friends, people from the right.
Wow. Yeah, because a lot of the people on the right supported
from
the
right.
Right.
Yeah. I could get there to talk to.
So much. I mean, that's such a powerful and to hear the background behind poems and stories. It's truly a gift and a presence. I wish we had more time. Helen, I wanted to ask you, we're keeping to the hour pretty much because I'd like to read one more poem, but then open it up to Q&A. Does that sound about right? Okay, so I'd like to close with a poem that also is moving it back to Boston, and it's called Boston Burning, Mission Hill, 1984. And the urgency is implied in the subject matter, and the subject matter was in the 1980s. My former husband and I lived in Mission Hill, right in the heart of Boston, and we observed a lot of the great arson fires that were going on in protest of not getting, salary cuts and whatever. So there was a lot of arson fires. Boston was deemed the arson capital of the United States. And my husband and I did try to work against it to the extent of having our own balcony set on fire by the Environmental Protection Agency, who called us up and told us to basically shut up. And we had seen this property in back of this factory that we were trying to start for windmills back then, a brewery, and my husband and I were watching as the vans were pulling in, and we called them up and we said, "This looks like this fantastic historical building is going to be lit on fire." Nobody paid attention. We went back and we were literally there when the van exploded, and we saw the lines of fire going up through, and this incredible building burned down. So this was going on in the 80s, but I'll just read one poem that I wrote. And it is called Boston Burning, Mission Hill, 1984. In the lit fuse voice of the Environmental Protection Agency, mind your own business. The phone receiver slammed down hard, my husband naked as Ezra, buckled in the corner, tearing out his hair. PCBs reeking from subsidized housing, dark smell, amber smell, mothball smell, and fire ablaze on our balcony. Now you've been warned. Altar of wood, bed of hot coals, no cherubim saved, no angelic guardians, no garland of laundry drying in night air, shadows scurrying in the dark in the Bromley Heath projects, no one hurrying, nothing here except roaches rushing out of a cooking pot. In the Mission Hill Auto Parts shop, the owner sitting vigil, shotgun at his side. In a van pulled into the Heat Street Brewery, two men rolling out tire after tire. I've seen the wind carry fire. In charred bricks, shattered glass, foreclosed churches, vacant pews. Fire, a witness of windows, fire, the night light. Massachusetts Fire Academy, red spilling across the sky. Fire in the firehouse, dog's breath lying. Fire rising in stairwells, Mayor Kevin White stepping down. Would we survive at the fire, hungry fire, in restaurants and famished news, in spit sizzling, trees bristling, and breath behind closed doors, in houses sitting quiet. Some doors take hours to burn through, others go in a flash. Fire in the named and unnamed, in notes of falling ashes. And thank you. For time's sake, what I'll just point out in writing this, and this took many, many drafts because I was thinking of it as a narrative, was that what took over for me, and I mentioned this with other poems, was the sound links. And I think that, you know, fire in the firehouse, dog's breath lying, fire in the would we survive, in spit sizzling, trees bursting, the breath behind closed doors. The language, it just, the emotion of the words started pulling each other, and the rhythm and the pacing paced up. So that, I think, was sort of the driving force behind this narrative. It started out more as a regular narrative, but then the sound and language took over, and I would like to think created a greater sense of urgency and immediacy as I started to literally trip over my own words to get as many words out before we all went up in flames. But anyway, so thank you so much. I mean, I think we've got like 10 minutes for a Q&A. So please, anybody have any questions or comments? We'd love to hear them.
Yeah,
Well,
you can either drop your questions in the chat or just turn your microphone on and ask your question.
Well, first I want to thank you, Dzvinia, for that reading. Your reading was very impassioned, you know, and I could feel that, you know, I could feel that edge of panic as the fire, you know, fire is burning all around your very apartment where you're living, you know, and that's terrifying. And we know these days there are so many wildfires in so many parts of the country, which must be terrifying for the people living, you know, in houses and in communities near that. And many people have had to evacuate, but you were right in the middle of a city. And these were human, you know, they're all human set fires, but, you know, these are deliberately set in the middle of the city, and that's terrifying.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
So we have a request to have, I'm not going to pronounce this right, Dzvinia read her poem in Spanish.
Yes.
Yeah. Eugenia, you have the poem. Tienes el poema contigo.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah.
Un momentito. Desaparecido. A la vuelta de la esquina desapareciste. Te dieron por perdido ante mis propios ojos. 2 agentes del servicio secreto te sacaron a golpes y te llevaron de tu oficina en la universidad. Más de 40 años han pasado y lo que dijiste ha quedado crudo en el aire con algún sabor adivino. Murmuraste en inglés, "It is finished". Los voceros de la ley y el orden amenazaban la población y los jinetes de la persecución cabalgaban los días grises. Los periódicos locales sin escribir una palabra, mientras un frío desconocido petrificó la verdad, donde me dejaste temblando en las sombras. Thank you. Gracias.
Gracias, Eugenia. Gracias. So
Gracias a
that's
ti.
what it sounds like. Yes. Yeah.
Are you working on any more collaborations together, Carolyne and Eugenia?
We are thinking, I mean, now that Eugenia is back in the state of Washington, we're thinking we might try to do some kind of workshop in person. There are a few entities that are interested, have hosted us in the past, and you know, let's see if something will work out. We did one reading via, what was that platform that works, that isn't easy to work, something StreamYard, and it was quite a challenge, but it was hosted by a poet, a woman in Guatemala. She's in Guatemala, right? Or Nicaragua? Nicaragua. Okay. And so we did a presentation, a reading and conversation for a magazine, an entity called 400 Elefantes, 400 elephants. And so we did it completely in Spanish. That was sometime last year.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. But we were thinking of doing some more collaboration. We may do a whole book at some point too, you know. I keep looking at at books of yours that I have here, you know. So, you know, we'll see.
I have been working in a few poems related to the 50 years now. It's kind of difficult.
Yeah.
It's kind of difficult to count until 50.
Yeah. And still be here, you know, still doing all of this. Yeah.
Right. When you pass 50, right, and count, it's very hard. And in effect, the title is I can't count until 50 anymore.
Yeah.
No puedo contar hasta 50 y más.
Thank you.
Yeah. 50 years, 1 point, 50 poems, impossible. Yeah.
Es posible descontar.
Right.
Comenzar
I did that.
subtraer,
Yes.
right? You can start subtracting years.
I have another question here that says, might you share a little about how you each choose poetry for your life mission?
Dzvinia, you go first.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Sure. Oh boy. Might you share a little about how you each chose poetry for your life? You know, I briefly say, you know, I used to hear people say, like, I remember Brian Voigt used to say, I write because I have to. And I never chose it. I mean, I have a background in studio art history. I have a business degree from Harvard Extension. Poetry was just something that women back in the 70s, women were muses. They weren't really poets that had, you know, the only way you get close to poetry is if you dated a guy who, you know, was a poet.
Right.
But I think something happens is that at some point you love something so much and you do it that it just breaks through. And so even though I was also a Catherine Gibbs graduate, so I could type and take shorthand like there's no tomorrow. So that's what actually brought me a paycheck. But I think it's just serendipity, and I say a higher power's grace that I was invited because somebody canceled at a MFA program. Somebody said, hey, there's this person, Dzvinia Orlowsky, and I had 1 or 2 books. And it just kind of stayed with it. But I think from about age 10 or age 8, you know, the muse visited me and I sat up in bed and just started rhyming like crazy. And it just stayed with me. And so I'm very grateful for anything, including being here with all of you and Carolyne. This is like, you know, this is what my life's about. So Carolyne, how about you? And now it's translation too, but anyway.
Yeah. I started somewhat the same. I started writing in high school, you know, which I had this wonderful teacher who was like, she was pivotal and key for so many of us, this whole group of us in high school. Her name was Sally Bryan. And she taught this course called lab writing, which was an odd name, but we would read works of philosophy by like Kierkegaard and Heidegger, and we would read all kinds of poetry and plays. And that was where I first got exposed to poets like James Wright and William Stafford and Theodore Roethke and any number of other, Archibald MacLeish. I just remember all these names. And then we would have days when we would sit and write in the classroom with classical music playing on the record player. That's how long ago it was, or jazz or something. And we would just write with the music. And I was so inspired by her, as were many of my other classmates, that I found myself really drawn to writing back then. And then when I got to undergraduate, I majored in English. And so I was reading all the poets and all the, the dramatists and the novels. But I never felt myself like, although I tell stories, but I like to tell stories in poems, because if you have to write a novel, you've got to spend so many hours in the chair every day, derriere in chair. And we sit enough as it is. But I felt like sometimes novels are too much. There's more detail, and the nice thing about poems is you have to choose really the key details and then allow the reader to imagine the rest. Whereas a novelist will go and describe every single crack in the wall or the wallpaper, so I also felt that poetry was more portable, and I knew I was going to do a lot of traveling. I was very restless. I needed to travel. And I knew that all I needed for poetry was one of these things, this little low-tech implement and some paper. That was all I needed. A paper and and a pen, or a pencil. And that was all I needed to write. And so it was really good for a person who wanted to be very mobile. And so that sort of is how I started.
Yeah, the pen still works.
Yeah. And when you drop it, it doesn't crash. The whole system doesn't go kablooey,
Yeah, it doesn't take a whole department to keep it running.
Right.
Yeah, oh, I enjoyed this so much. It very much reminded me of Padre Gotuma's on poetry. I listened to that a lot, and I love hearing people pick poems apart and put them back together and seeing things that I don't see. And there were so many aha moments listening. So thank you so much for being here. For our audience, Dzvinia Orlowsky will be back this Saturday for a 2-hour workshop. I've dropped the link in the chat, and it's available on our events page at jocolibrary.org. She would like to have poems sent by you so that she can personalize her workshop, which is wonderful. And I'm going to put my email in the chat, or you can send them to Lisa Allen.
I was going to that my hope too is that maybe if it's not too much to have these poems compiled and sent to the attendees so that everybody will be able to see everybody else's poems. That's a little bit, if that's doable, if that's doable, that would be terrific. And also, feel free if you do come to the workshop to bring this handout, because if we want to talk about a Pantun or something, you've already got it. We can go back and we've already become familiar with it thanks to Carolyne. So.
And what time is the workshop again?
It is at it's at 9:30, I believe.
9:30.
10 to 12, I think, for me.
So it would be 7 to 9 for me in the morning. Ooh, that's early. That's early.
You're gonna come in your pajamas. Okay.
Yeah, you can leave your camera off. We give you permission this one time. Leave your camera off. You don't have to leave your home. And then Dzvinia will also be in conversation with Jeff Friedman on Monday evening at 6:30 Central Standard Time. Jean Ann says she saw 9. I can't find it.
I think
What
that's
have I
right.
done?
I think that's right.
I think we did make it 9. Yes, when you click on the link, it'll show you the real time. I apologize.
So 9 to 11. So that would be 7 to 9 my time. So
yeah.
I can get up occasionally.
Yeah.
Good practice.
Yeah, so hope to see you all there. And then our next series is a generative workshop series with Poet Laureate of Kansas, Tracy Brimhall. She'll be teaching poems that will fit on a poetry walk board.
Oh, okay.
Because we'll be taking submissions for April Poetry Month. Those, I've dropped those in the chat. And if you get on our events page and just search generative poetry, they'll all pop up. or you can email me or call me or Facebook me.
And I hope I'm now on your mailing list, because I'd like to, follow with some of these. That'd be great.
Okay.
And I'm
All
going to
right.
try to attend on Saturday if I can,
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. Well, good night, everyone. And thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Gracias. Eugenia, we'll talk soon. Vamos a hablar muy pronto. Okay.